They say a mother's love is unconditional, that no matter how sharp the words or how heavy the disappointment, it bends instead of breaks. I believed that for most of my life. I believed it when my son Daniel was born, his tiny hand curling around my finger as if to promise he would never let go. I believed it when he took his first steps across the worn floorboards of our kitchen, his smile wide and proud as he stumbled into my arms. I believed it when he left for college, carrying the weight of our sacrifices on his shoulders, waving as if he knew the road ahead would change him, but not us. I believed it until the day he stood in my living room, his voice hard and his smile cruel, and told me that my time here was over. But let me begin where the wound first opened, so you understand why that smile of his, once my greatest joy, became the sharpest knife. My name is Margaret Ellis, and for 69 years I have carried more than most could imagine. I buried a husband who was my anchor, raised a son while working 2 jobs, tended a home that felt too big when it was just me left in it, and kept the lights on when bills whispered threats I had no strength to answer. Through it all, I told myself it was worth it, for Daniel. Everything was for him. Every blister from scrubbing floors, every late night behind a counter, every corner I cut so he could have shoes that fit and books that opened doors for him. When my husband Robert passed 12 years ago, Daniel stood beside me at the graveside, his hand tight around mine. He whispered, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you now." That promise was a balm to a widow's heart. I believed him. For years after, I managed on my own. The house was old, but it was mine. Robert and I had built our lives here, raised Daniel within these walls. Every photograph on the mantel, every creak in the floorboards told a story. Even when loneliness crept in at night, the house itself kept me company. I cooked meals for one. I tended the garden Robert had loved. I sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the sun dip low, whispering his name into the breeze. Daniel visited less as the years passed. Work, he said. Life. Responsibilities. I understood. Children grow, they build their own lives. That is what we raise them for. But I always believed that underneath it all, his heart was still tethered to this place, to me. Then, one winter afternoon, he came unannounced. He stood in the doorway with his coat still on, shaking snow from his shoulders, his smile sharp in a way I didn't recognize. Not the open grin of my boy, but something practiced, something meant to disarm. "Mom," he began, his voice casual, "we need to talk about the house." The way he said it chilled me more than the wind sneaking through the doorframe. We sat in the living room, the fire crackling, the same room where I had once read him bedtime stories and where Robert had sat polishing his boots after long days. Daniel leaned back in the chair, crossing one leg over the other like a man settling into a negotiation. He spoke smoothly, too smoothly. "You're getting older, Mom. The upkeep here, it's a lot. The house is too big for you. Don't you think it's time to downsize? Move somewhere easier? Somewhere smaller?" I stared at him, my teacup trembling slightly in my hand. "Smaller? This is my home, Daniel. Your father and I built a life here." He smiled, but it wasn't warm. "I know, Mom. But things change. You don't need all this space anymore. And, well, I could make good use of it. My wife and I have been talking. We want to expand. Maybe start a business. This property would be perfect." The words landed like stones in my chest. My own son, speaking of my home as though it were already his. "Daniel," I whispered, "this house isn't just wood and brick. It's wasted space," he interrupted, his voice firmer now. Mom, you can't manage it forever. It's better to make the transition now, while you're still comfortable. Comfortable. The word burned. I had sacrificed so much for his comfort, and now he wielded it like a weapon. I set my cup down, my hands shaking. You promised me, Daniel. You promised after your father died that you'd take care of me. His smile widened, cold as ice. And I am, Mom. Taking care of you means making decisions you can't. You can come stay with us. We'll set up a room for you. You'll be fine. A room. In his house. As though my entire life could be folded into a corner of his. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was cruel, ungrateful, blind. But the words stuck in my throat. I could only sit there, staring at the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved beyond reason, as he smiled at me with a stranger's grin. That night, I did not sleep. I walked the halls of the house, touching the photographs, the worn banister, the quilt Robert's mother had stitched that still lay across my bed. Memories pressed in from every corner, each one whispering that this place was more than shelter. It was the story of my life. To lose it would be to lose myself. But Daniel's words echoed louder. You can't manage it forever. Wasted space. Better to make the transition now. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the deed spread out before me, my name written in black ink. I traced it with my finger, the same way I once traced Daniel's cheek when he was small, when I believed his smile would always mean love. And as the sun rose, I made a decision. I would not be erased. The next day, Daniel returned, his wife at his side. She carried brochures for senior living facilities, bright pamphlets full of smiling gray-haired people playing cards and sipping lemonade. She placed them on my table as if she were offering me a gift. See, Margaret? She said sweetly. These places are wonderful. You'd make friends. You'd have activities. No more stress about the house. Isn't that better? I looked at her, then at Daniel, who stood behind her with that same practiced smile. And for the first time in years, I felt something inside me harden. I folded the brochures, slid them back across the table, and said quietly, No, this is my home. I am not leaving. The smile slipped from Daniel's face, just for a moment. The mask cracked, and in that crack, I saw the truth, not concern for me, but hunger for what I had. He covered it quickly, chuckling. We'll see, Mom. We'll see. But I saw enough to know that a storm was coming, and this time, I would be ready. If you've ever felt betrayed by the very people you trusted most, you'll understand why I have to tell this story. Please subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The days after Daniel first spoke those words were filled with a strange quiet. It wasn't peace, not the kind you earn after hardship, not the gentle silence of an evening on the porch with a glass of tea. It was the kind of quiet that presses against your skin, waiting, reminding you that something worse is coming. His smile had cracked that day, but his determination had not. I saw it in the way he looked at the walls, the way he glanced at the orchard out back. He saw not my life, but opportunity. I spent those days in a haze, moving through the house like a sentinel, touching the walls, the pictures, the furniture that carried Robert's memory. My husband's boots still sat in the mudroom. His work jacket still hung from a hook by the door. I whispered to them, asking what he would do if he stood in my shoes now. The silence gave me no answers, but it gave me something else. Resolve. Daniel was not finished. That much I knew. The question was how far he was willing to go. I didn't have to wait long to find out. It was a Thursday afternoon when he returned. this time with his wife and their eldest son, Ethan. They arrived without warning, their SUV crunching on the gravel drive, its gleaming paint a stark contrast to the weathered wood of my porch. I was shelling peas at the kitchen table when I saw them through the window, my hands stilling mid-motion. They entered with smiles stretched too wide. Daniel's wife, Lillian, carried more brochures, this time not just for senior living, but for retirement investments. She laid them out across the table as though she were dealing cards in a game she knew she had already won. "Margaret," she said smoothly, "you have options. You don't need to carry this burden anymore. Think of how much easier your life would be. You'd never have to worry about maintenance again. And Daniel, well, he has big plans for this place. You'd be proud. The word burned. Proud that my life's work would be handed off as if I were a guest overstaying her welcome. Proud that my sacrifices were being measured in square footage and profit margins. I looked at Ethan, who stood awkwardly near the door. He avoided my eyes, shuffling his feet. I realized then that they had brought him as a prop, to soften me, to remind me of youth and family. But all it did was make my heart ache. What kind of lesson was Daniel teaching his son? That greed is justified if it's aimed at your own blood? I pushed the brochures back across the table, my voice quiet but firm. No. Daniel's smile twitched. "Mom, be reasonable." "I am," I said. "This is my home. And I am not leaving." The silence that followed was thick. Lillian's smile faltered. Ethan looked down at his shoes. Daniel's jaw tightened, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the frustration beneath. Finally, he stood, gathering the papers with sharp movements. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. But fine. If you won't listen to reason, we'll find another way." His words hung in the air long after they left, colder than the draft that seeped under the door. The following week, the pressure began in new ways. The banker called, asking if I had considered estate planning. The county office mailed me a packet about property tax relief, with a handwritten note clipped to the top. "Family members often help with this. Need assistance?" At the grocery store, a neighbor asked gently if I was thinking about selling. It didn't take long to piece it together. Daniel had been busy planting seeds, casting me as frail, incapable, in need of help I hadn't asked for. It was subtle, but effective. Doubt spreads fast, especially in small towns where gossip fills the air quicker than rain. Each night, I wrote it all down in a notebook. Dates, names, words. The record grew thick with evidence of his manipulation. It steadied me, proof that I wasn't imagining the shift. But it also broke something inside me. To know my own son was weaving a net of lies around me, trying to tighten it until I had no way out. The breaking point came one evening when Emily, my daughter, called. She lived 2 states away, busy with her own family, but she had always been my ally. Her voice on the line, however, carried hesitation. "Mom," she began, "Daniel called me. He said you're struggling, that the house is too much, that you've been forgetting things. He asked if I'd support the idea of moving you somewhere easier." The words hit harder than any blow. "Emily," I whispered, "you know me? Do I sound confused? Do I sound incapable?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No," she admitted, "but he's convincing, Mom. He sounds like he cares." I pressed the phone tight against my ear, fighting back tears. "He doesn't care, Emily. He wants this house. He wants what your father and I built. Don't let him blind you to the truth." Her sigh trembled. "I believe you. But you need to protect yourself. He's not going to stop." When I hung up, My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. That was the moment I realized this was no longer just a family disagreement. It was a battle for my very identity, my dignity, my place in the world. The next day, Daniel returned again. This time, he didn't bother with brochures. He walked straight into the living room, looked around with a smirk, and said, "You can fight me all you want, Mom, but in the end, this house will be mine. You can leave gracefully, or you can be forced. Your choice." Something inside me snapped. I stood, my voice sharp as steel. "No, Daniel. The choice is yours. Do you want to be remembered as the son who honored his mother, or as the man who betrayed her? Because I will not leave. Not willingly, not quietly, and not while I draw breath." His smile slipped again, just for a moment. Then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its panes. I sank into my chair, my chest heaving, but for the first time, I did not feel fear. I felt strength. He had shown his hand, and I had answered. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Robert's photograph propped in front of me. I traced his face with trembling fingers and whispered, "I'm still here. I'm still fighting. For us, for what we built. He won't take it, not while I have breath." The photograph, of course, did not answer. But the orchard outside rustled in the wind, the trees groaning softly, as if the land itself was telling me, "You are not alone. You are still rooted here." And so I wrote again in my notebook, filling the page with one sentence repeated over and over until the ink smudged beneath my hand. "This is my home. I am not leaving." The tension in my house grew thicker with each passing week. Daniel's visits no longer carried the pretense of kindness. He stopped bringing brochures or sweetening his tone with talk of what's best. Instead, his words grew sharper, his footsteps heavier, his eyes colder. If the mask had once been meant to fool me, he no longer bothered wearing it. I had lived long enough to recognize the way greed corrodes a person. It starts as a seed, small enough to ignore, but once watered with envy, it spreads like ivy, curling around everything good until it strangles. I saw it every time Daniel's gaze lingered on the walls of this house. Every time he looked out at the orchard Robert and I had tended for decades. It was no longer just a home to him, it was spoils. But greed blinds as much as it drives. And Daniel's blindness would soon betray him. One Saturday morning, I walked to the market in town. The sun was bright, the air crisp with the first hint of spring. I carried my basket as I always did, nodding at familiar faces. But I noticed the whispers immediately. Two women by the produce stand lowered their voices when I passed. A man I'd known since Robert's days at the mill raised his eyebrows as if in pity. At the butcher's counter, I heard it plainly. "Poor Mrs. Ellis," someone murmured behind me. "Daniel says she forgets things. Says she left the stove on twice last week." Dangerous at her age, I stiffened, my hands gripping the basket handle. Lies. All lies. I had never left the stove on. My memory was sharp enough to recall the exact day Robert had carved our initials into the oak tree by the barn. Sharp enough to remember every line of his handwriting on the last letter he wrote me. And yet here were strangers repeating Daniel's version of me, painting me as frail, confused, unfit. I turned slowly, my voice calm but firm. "That's not true. Don't repeat what you don't know." The woman flushed, muttering apologies, but the damage was done. Doubt is a disease that spreads faster than truth. I walked home with my basket full of groceries and my heart full of anger. That evening, I added another entry to my notebook. Daniel spreading lies in town. Stove, memory, incapacity. Witnesses: Mrs. Green, Mr. Lott. The record grew heavier with every page, a shield I built word by word. A week later, Daniel returned, this time with paperwork. He slapped a folder on my kitchen table, his smile tight, his voice clipped. "It's time to make this official, Mom. Guardianship. Don't fight it. It's for your own good." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the lines. Words like incapacitated, inability to manage affairs, appointment of guardian. Each one was a blade pressed against my throat. I looked up, meeting his eyes. "You really think you can erase me with signatures?" He leaned back, smug. "It's not about erasing you. It's about reality. The judge will see the truth. Everyone already knows you can't handle this place. Why fight the inevitable?" I closed the folder slowly, then pushed it back across the table. "Because this is my life, Daniel. My home, my story, and I will not let you write me out of it." His smile faltered for just a moment. Then he gathered the papers and stormed out, muttering under his breath. That night, I called Emily. My voice shook as I told her everything. She listened quietly, then said, "He's going too far." "I'll come." And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The guardianship hearing arrived on a gray morning. The courthouse smelled of dust and old wood, the kind of place where truth and lies wrestle in silence. Fletcher, my lawyer, stood beside me, calm as ever. Across the aisle, Daniel sat stiff, his wife beside him, their faces a mask of determination. The judge listened as Daniel's lawyer painted me as frail, forgetful, incapable. They spoke of reports from neighbors, concerns about my safety. Each word stung, not because it was true, but because it was spoken in the same tone people use when they claim to care. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, my knees aching, but my voice steady. I spoke of the bills I paid on time, the repairs I had made, the garden I tended. I presented my notebook, thick, with dates and details, a living chronicle of my clarity. I even pulled from my satchel Robert's letter, the one he wrote before he died, naming me as the rightful steward of this land. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Petition denied," she said firmly. "Mrs. Ellis is fully competent. Case closed." The gavel struck like thunder. Daniel's face darkened, his jaw tight, his eyes flashing with rage. Lillian reached for his arm, but he shook her off and stormed out of the room. I sat down slowly, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from triumph. For the first time, the law itself had spoken on my side. But victory does not always end the war. In the days after the hearing, Daniel grew quieter, but not gentler. He stopped coming by, but I heard from neighbors that he was still talking, still spinning his lies. Yet something had shifted. People no longer looked at me with pity. They looked at him with suspicion. His mask had cracked in front of them too. One evening, Emily arrived with her children. She embraced me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You stood, Mom," she whispered. "You showed him. You showed everyone." I held her close, my own tears falling. "I had to," I said softly. "For Robert, for this home, for myself." We sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the orchard. The children played in the yard, their laughter drifting on the breeze. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not fragile, but solid, rooted like the trees around us. Yet I knew Daniel was not finished. Men like him rarely are. But now, I was no longer afraid. Because his smile, the smile that once promised me safety, the smile that had turned cruel, had finally vanished. And in its place, I saw the truth. His hunger would never defeat my resolve. And this fight, though not over, was no longer mine alone. I thought the courtroom gavel striking down on the guardianship petition would be the end of it. I thought Daniel, humiliated and exposed, would retreat, lick his wounds in silence, and leave me to live the rest of my days in peace. But I underestimated the hunger of a man who has tasted power, or rather, the possibility of it. Some hungers cannot be quieted by defeat. They grow sharper with every denial, like a blade honed on stone. For a few days after the hearing, the house was quiet. I dared to breathe. I walked the orchard in the mornings without looking over my shoulder, touched Robert's photograph without tears stinging my eyes, even managed to sit in the parlor with my knitting, humming old hymns to myself. But it was only a pause, a lull between storms. And soon enough, the wind began to howl again. The first sign came in whispers. Mrs. Lane stopped me in the post office, her voice hesitant. "Margaret, I heard Daniel's been saying the judge was biased. That you had help. That you tricked everyone." I smiled as best I could, but inside, something twisted. Lies don't die easily. They rot slowly, seeping poison even when their roots have been cut. I thanked her for telling me, then walked home with my head high, though my legs trembled. The second sign was worse. I came home one afternoon to find the back gate open, the latch dangling. Inside the yard, footprints marked the soil near the barn. Nothing was taken, but everything was disturbed, as if someone wanted me to know they had been there, close enough to touch my life. I shut the gate, locked it with a chain, and wrote in my notebook, "Trespass, no theft, intimidation likely." But the third sign broke something in me. It was Emily. She came with the children one Sunday, her arms full of groceries, her smile tired but kind. We cooked together, laughing as the little ones chased each other through the house. It felt like a piece of my old life had returned, like love had stepped back through the door. But as evening fell and she prepared to leave, her face grew solemn. "Mom," she said softly, "Daniel came to me. He begged me to side with him again. He says you're stubborn, that you'll ruin everything, that he's only trying to save the family legacy." Her eyes brimmed with tears. I told him no. I told him I've seen enough to know the truth. But he's angry, Mom. Angrier than I've ever seen him. I hugged her tight, my chest heavy. "Then we must be ready," I whispered. Ready, though, is a word that carries weight. I did what I could. I reinforced the locks, spoke openly with neighbors, kept my notebook close. Fletcher advised me to remain calm, but vigilant. "Men like Daniel burn themselves out eventually," he said. But Fletcher hadn't seen the way Daniel's eyes glowed with fury in that courtroom, the way his smile had vanished to reveal the raw hunger beneath. A week later, the storm broke. It was late evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the lamp casting a warm glow across my notebook. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. I almost didn't hear the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. But then came the slam of a door, heavy footsteps on the porch, and before I could rise, the front door burst open. Daniel stood there, his face flushed, his eyes wild. Behind him was Lillian, pale and tight-lipped, and two men I didn't recognize. They were large, rough-looking, their jackets stained with work grease. My breath caught. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice slick with false calm. "It's time. No more waiting, no more games. Pack your things. These men will help the room spun." "Help?" I whispered. "You mean throw me out." His smile returned then, but it was twisted, hollow. "You'll thank me one day. This house is wasted on you. We'll make it thrive." I rose slowly, gripping the table for support. This is my home, Daniel. You cannot take it while I breathe. Lillian shifted uneasily, her hands wringing. One of the men muttered, "This doesn't feel right." But Daniel shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Do it," he snapped. The man stepped forward, but before he could move farther, a shout rang out from the porch. "Stop right there!" It was Mr. Johnson, my neighbor, with Mrs. Franklin beside him. They had seen the lights, heard the commotion, and come running. Behind them, two more neighbors appeared, flashlights cutting through the dark. The men froze. Daniel's face drained of color. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Mrs. Franklin spoke, her voice fierce. "We've seen enough, Daniel." "Enough lies, enough threats. You won't touch her. Not tonight, not ever." The men backed away, muttering. Lillian grabbed Daniel's arm, whispering urgently. He stood there, trembling with rage, then spat on the floor. "This isn't over," he growled. "You'll regret this." They left in a flurry of footsteps and slamming doors. The sound of the truck faded into the night, leaving only the wind and my pounding heart. I sank into a chair, tears spilling freely at last. Mrs. Franklin took my hand, her grip steady. "You're not alone, Margaret. We'll stand with you." The others nodded, their faces grim but determined. For the first time, I realized Daniel had lost more than a court case. He had lost the community. The mask was gone, the truth laid bare for all to see. But even as relief washed over me, fear lingered. His words echoed in my ears. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." And I knew he was not finished. The storm had broken, but the war was not yet won. For 2 nights after Daniel stormed from my house with the neighbors standing guard, I barely slept. Every sound made me stiffen. The creak of the floorboards, the groan of the old windmill outside, the rustle of branches against the siding. I lay in bed with my heart thudding, wondering if his truck would roar down the drive again, if he would come back with more men, more fury, more schemes. But the nights remained quiet. It wasn't peace. It was strategy. I knew it. Daniel wasn't the type to lick his wounds in silence. He was plotting, waiting, sharpening whatever weapon he thought might win the war he had already lost. On the 3rd morning, I walked into town for groceries. People stared openly now, not with pity, but with recognition. They had heard what happened. Mrs. Franklin had told them, Mr. Johnson had told them. And word spreads faster in a small town than fire on dry grass. At the post office, a man I'd known only in passing tipped his hat. "Good for you, Mrs. Ellis," he said. "About time someone stood up to that boy." At the market, the cashier whispered, "We heard." "Don't you worry, we've got your back." Their support warmed me, but it also frightened me. Daniel would hear the same whispers, see the same looks. And nothing stings a proud man worse than public humiliation. It didn't take long for the backlash to arrive. One afternoon, as I folded laundry on the porch, a letter was slipped into my mailbox. No return address, no signature, just block letters scrawled across a single sheet of paper. "You think the town will save you? You're wrong. Everyone has a price. You can't fight me forever." I sat with the paper trembling in my hands. Anger surged hotter than fear. I slipped it into my notebook, another piece of evidence, another stone in the wall I was building against him. That evening, Emily called. Her voice was shaky. "Mom, Daniel's furious. He says the neighbors humiliated him, that you set them up against him. He's blaming me too." "Emily," I said gently, "this isn't your fault. He did this to himself." Her voice broke. "He told me if I don't choose him, I'll regret it." I don't know what to do. Tears pricked my eyes. "You choose truth, Emily. That's all. Truth doesn't make you regret. Lies do. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, I'm scared of him, Mom. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. So am I. But we can't let fear rule us. A week later, another blow came, this time through the courts. Fletcher called, his tone grim. Daniels filed a new petition. He claims your deed was invalid, that Robert was coerced when he transferred it to you. I gasped. Coerced? Robert signed it because it was our plan, our life together. How dare he? He has no proof, Fletcher reassured me, but he's trying to drag this through the mud. We'll fight it. You must hold steady. I hung up, shaking, dragging Robert's name, Robert's memory, into his greed. That was a cruelty I hadn't prepared for. I sat at the kitchen table with Robert's photograph in front of me, tears sliding down my face. I'll defend you, love, I whispered. I'll defend us both. When the hearing came, the courtroom was fuller than before. Word had spread. People wanted to see. Daniel walked in stiff and proud, but his eyes darted nervously toward the benches where neighbors sat, their faces set in judgment. His lawyer argued, weaving tales of pressure, of a dying man coerced into handing over land he didn't want to. But then Fletcher rose, calm as ever, and presented the letter Robert had written in his last months. If anything happens to me, Margaret must have full authority. She is the steward of our life, our land, our story. The judge barely needed more. The petition was dismissed, the gavel falling like a hammer. This time, Daniel didn't just frown. He exploded. This is a conspiracy! He shouted, slamming his hands on the table. She's tricked you all! You'll see. You'll all see. The bailiff stepped forward, warning him, and he stormed out, his footsteps echoing through the courtroom. I sat, my hands trembling, but relief flooding me. Another victory. Another proof. Another step toward silence. But victory is heavy. That night, I sat on the porch with Emily beside me, her children asleep inside. She looked at me with wide eyes. He's unraveling, Mom. He won't stop until... She trailed off, unable to finish. Until what? I pressed softly. She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. Until he destroys himself, or us. I held her hand, my heart aching. Then we must endure, Emily. We must stand until he can't anymore. The community's support grew louder, stronger. People began stopping by with food, with kind words, with offers to help repair the barn or mow the lawn. Not out of pity, but solidarity. I was no longer a widow fighting alone. I was a woman the town had claimed as their own, a symbol of standing against cruelty, even when that cruelty wore the face of family. And Daniel, he had become the opposite. Once respected, now pitied. Once trusted, now whispered about. I heard it at church, at the diner. Shame what he did to his mother. Greed makes a man ugly, but shame doesn't stop the desperate. The breaking point came late one night. I was sitting in the living room, the lamp glowing dim, when headlights swept across the yard. My heart froze. Daniel's truck. He stumbled up the porch, banging on the door. Mom! Open up! I stayed seated, my heart pounding until the banging grew louder. Finally, I rose and cracked the door, the chain still latched. His face was wild, his eyes bloodshot. You think you've beaten me? He snarled. This house will be mine, one way or another. If you won't sign it, I'll take it when you're gone. And maybe, Mom. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. Maybe that'll be sooner than you think. My breath caught. Fear like ice slid through me. But before I could answer, footsteps sounded on the porch. Mr. Johnson again, flashlight in hand, followed by two more neighbors. They had seen the truck, heard the shouts. "Leave, Daniel!" Mr. Johnson barked. "Now!" Daniel froze, his rage burning, but outnumbered. He spat on the porch and stormed back to his truck, tires squealing into the night. I shut the door, my knees shaking, my breath coming in gasps. Emily appeared from the hallway, her face pale. She had been staying the night. She clutched my arm. "Mom, he threatened you." I nodded, tears spilling. "Yes, and that means this isn't just about property anymore. It's about safety, about survival." That night, I wrote the words in my notebook, my hand shaking. He threatened my life. And as I closed the book, I knew the final act was coming. Daniel was on the edge, and when he fell, it would be for good. When Daniel threatened me on the porch, his voice low and venomous, the world tilted. For months, I had told myself his greed was ugly, his schemes cruel, but they were still only about the house, about the land. That night, as the neighbors stood behind me and Emily clutched my arm with terror, in her eyes, I realized the truth. This was no longer about property. This was about survival. I sat at the kitchen table long after Daniel's truck had roared away, the lamplight trembling across my notebook. My hand shook as I wrote the words, "He threatened my life." Witnesses: Johnson, Hayes, Franklin, Emily present. Each letter felt like carving into stone, like inscribing truth so deep it could not be erased. Emily sat across from me, pale and silent, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. Finally, she whispered, "Mom, I can't believe it. I can't believe he would go that far." I looked at her, my voice quiet but firm. "Believe it, because denial is how he's gotten this far. We wanted to think it was just stress, just ambition. But it's darker than that. He's lost himself." She wept quietly, her tears sliding down her cheeks. "He's my brother." How did it come to this? I reached across the table, took her hand. "Because greed grows in silence, and because I loved him enough to trust him when I shouldn't have." The next morning, Fletcher came. I had called him at dawn, my voice hoarse, telling him everything. He sat at the table with his glasses perched low, reading my notebook entries one by one. When he finished, he looked at me gravely. "Margaret, this isn't just civil anymore. This is criminal. Threats, trespass, harassment. You have grounds to involve the sheriff. Do you want to press charges?" The words echoed in my mind. Press charges against my own son. My Daniel, whose tiny hand once clung to mine, whose laughter once filled these rooms. The thought tore me apart. But then I remembered his words on the porch. "Maybe sooner than you think." I straightened my shoulders. "Yes, do it," Emily gasped softly, but when I turned to her, she nodded, tears brimming. "It's the only way to stop him, Mom." The sheriff came that afternoon, a man I'd known since he was a boy. He listened carefully, his jaw tightening as I read the words from my notebook. When I finished, he nodded. "We'll file a restraining order. If he steps foot on this property again, he'll be arrested." The papers were drawn up swiftly, the ink barely dry before relief washed over me. For the first time, I felt a wall rising between me and Daniel's fury. Thin, fragile perhaps, but a wall nonetheless. But paper cannot silence obsession. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood on the porch watching Emily's children chase each other across the yard. Their laughter rang out like bells, pure and untarnished. For a moment, peace seemed possible. Then Emily's phone buzzed. She looked at it, her face paling. "It's Daniel," she whispered. She held it out to me, and I saw the message. "Traitor. You'll regret this too." My chest clenched. Emily dropped onto the porch swing, burying her face in her hands. He's lost his mind, Mom. He's coming after all of us. I sat beside her, pulling her close. Then we hold the line together. He may have lost himself, but he won't take us with him. The next few days blurred with tension. Neighbors stopped by constantly, checking on me, making sure the house was never empty. Mrs. Franklin even slept in the guest room one night, her old hunting rifle propped against the wall. "Just in case," she said with a wink, but her eyes were deadly serious. The sheriff drove by often, his patrol car idling at the end of the lane. The restraining order was a shield, but it also made me feel exposed, like I had painted a target on my back. Daniel stayed away, but his presence lingered like smoke after a fire. I found boot prints near the orchard one morning, too fresh to be old. Emily received another message. "You think you can hide behind her skirts?" Wait. I added each detail to my notebook, the record growing thicker, heavier. It was my weapon now, every page proof of who I was, who he had become. The breaking point came on a night thick with summer heat. The windows were open, the curtains stirring with a faint breeze. Emily and the children were asleep upstairs. I sat in the living room with my knitting, the lamp casting a warm circle of light. Then I heard it, a scrape at the back door. My heart lurched. I froze, the needles slipping from my hands. Another scrape, louder this time. Then the rattle of the latch. I rose slowly, my knees trembling, and moved toward the kitchen. The sound stopped. Silence pressed in. I reached for the phone on the counter, my hands shaking. Before I could dial, the sheriff's patrol car headlights swept across the yard. The scrape of tires on gravel. The flash of red and blue lights. I rushed to the window just in time to see a figure dart from the shadows of the barn, sprinting toward the trees. Too far to see clearly, but I knew. I knew it was him. The sheriff gave chase, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Shouts echoed, dogs barked in the distance, but after a frantic 10 minutes, he returned, shaking his head. Gone, but it was him. No doubt about it. I sank into a chair, my body shaking. Emily rushed down the stairs, her eyes wide with fear. "Was it?" "Yes," I whispered. "It was Daniel." She covered her mouth, tears spilling. "Mom, he won't stop. He won't stop until—" I took her hand, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. "Then we'll be stronger than him. We'll stand. We'll endure. And when he finally falls, he'll fall alone." That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed listening to every creak, every rustle, every sigh of the old house. Sleep came only in fragments, broken by dreams of doors splintering, of Robert's voice whispering, "Hold fast, Margaret, hold fast." When dawn finally broke, pale and fragile, I rose with a decision as firm as stone. This war was nearing its end, and I would see it through. The night Daniel tried to force his way into my home and fled. When the sheriff's lights swept the yard, I understood that the battle had reached its last stage. Men who are desperate enough to threaten, to trespass, to stalk in the dark, they either break through or break apart. I didn't know which it would be, but I knew it was coming. For days afterward, the town seemed to buzz with the news. Word had spread quickly. Daniel Ellis, once respected, now little more than a man unraveling. Neighbors came by more often than ever, bringing food, staying late, keeping watch. Mrs. Franklin said plainly, "He's finished, Margaret." Everyone sees him for what he is now, but I knew humiliation often drives a man further, not back. The restraining order was extended, the sheriff checking on me daily. Emily moved in with the children for a time, her marriage to Lillian's brother already fractured beyond repair. She admitted one evening, her eyes rimmed red, I told Lillian I couldn't stand by him anymore. She cried. She knows, but she's trapped too. I held her hand across the table. You've done enough, Emily. You've chosen truth. That's what matters. But Daniel had not chosen truth. The final confrontation came on a blistering afternoon in July. The sun beat down mercilessly, the orchard buzzing with cicadas, the air thick with heat. I was inside, the children napping upstairs, Emily folding laundry beside me, when the roar of an engine shattered the stillness. We rushed to the window. Daniel's truck barreled down the drive, dust rising behind it like smoke. He stopped so suddenly the tires screeched, and he leapt out, slamming the door. His face was crimson, his shirt plastered to him with sweat. Emily gasped. "Mom!" I gripped her arm. "Stay here." I stepped onto the porch, my knees stiff, my heart pounding, but my back straight. "Mom!" he shouted, striding toward me. "You've ruined me!" "Do you understand? Everyone in town is laughing at me. You and your little notebook, your lies, your friends, they've poisoned everything." His voice cracked, no longer smooth, no longer confident. It was raw, jagged, desperate. I stood firm. "I didn't ruin you, Daniel. You ruined yourself. Your greed, your lies, they've stripped you bare, and now everyone sees what you are." He stopped at the steps, his fists clenched. "You think you've won? You think this house, this land, means you've beaten me? I'll see you gone if it's the last thing I do." Behind me, the door opened. Emily stepped out, her voice trembling but strong. "No, Daniel. It's over. Mom's not alone anymore. None of us believe you. You've lost." He whirled on her, his face contorted. "Traitor? You're my sister. You're supposed to stand with me." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't waver. "Not when you betray our mother. Not when you betray yourself." The sheriff's car pulled into the drive then, lights flashing. Mr. Johnson's truck followed, and Mrs. Franklin's. Within moments, the yard filled with witnesses, neighbors, protectors, truth-bearers. Daniel's shoulders sagged as he saw them. His fury sputtered, his bravado collapsing. He looked at me, his eyes wild but wet. I just wanted more." I shook my head slowly. "And in reaching for more, you lost everything." The sheriff stepped forward, papers in hand. "Daniel Ellis, you're under arrest for violating a restraining order and making threats." The cuffs clicked around his wrists. He didn't fight, not really. His strength was gone, drained by months of lies, of rage, of a battle he could never win. As they led him to the car, he glanced back at me one last time. The smile was gone. For the first time, his face was bare, broken, defeated. That night, the house was quiet in a new way. Not tense, not waiting, but settled. Emily and I sat on the porch while the children slept, the air cooler now, the stars bright above. She leaned against me, her voice soft. "It's really over, isn't it?" I nodded, tears sliding down my cheeks. "Yes, it's over." We sat in silence, the orchard swaying gently in the night breeze. For the first time in so long, I felt Robert's presence not as a weight, but as a warmth. His land, our land, was safe, and I was still here. In the days that followed, the town rallied around me. People stopped me on the street, in the market, at church. "You showed us all," they said. "You proved what dignity looks like." I realized then that my fight had not only been for myself, it had been for every person told they were too old, too weak, too small to matter. My answer had not just silenced Daniel, it had spoken for all of us. I walked the orchard one evening, the grass cool beneath my feet, the trees heavy with fruit. I placed my hand on the rough bark of the old oak Robert had carved our initials into and whispered, "We did it, love. We kept it. It's still ours." The wind stirred the branches, carrying the faintest echo of his laugh. I smiled through my tears, because I had answered Daniel, not with hate, not with violence, but with truth, with strength, with the unshakable claim of a woman who refused to be erased. And that answer will stand as long as I draw breath. If you've ever been underestimated, doubted, or pushed aside, you know my story. Please subscribe, share, and leave a comment below, because your voice matters and your story deserves to be heard too.